The blood on Thomas Carmichael's hands had long since dried, but he still scrubbed them 3 times each morning in the icy creek water behind what remained of his cabin, as though repetition might somehow wash away the memory of holding his wife as her breathing stopped. 2 years had passed since fever took Alina, and still the farmhouse echoed with her absence, every floorboard a reminder of footsteps that would never sound again, every doorway a frame for a ghost that refused to fade. He was splitting wood when he first saw the orc woman, his axe frozen mid-swing as his eyes registered the impossible sight of her collapsed form at the edge of his property, where the cultivated land gave way to wilderness. Thomas knew he should have turned away, should have walked back to his cabin and pretended he had seen nothing, because harboring an orc meant exile from the settlement at best and a noose at worst. But something in the way she lay there, utterly still except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest, reminded him of helplessness, of watching someone slip away while you stood paralyzed by your own inadequacy. He approached cautiously, axe still in hand, though he could not say whether he carried it as weapon or tool. Up close, she was larger than he had expected, easily matching his own height, though she was clearly malnourished, her green skin stretched tight over prominent ribs. Dark hair matted with dried blood fell across her face, and when he knelt beside her, he could see the wound on her shoulder, deep and festering, the edges inflamed with infection. Her clothes were strange, made of rough tanned leather decorated with patterns he did not recognize, and they were torn in multiple places, revealing older scars that spoke of a violent life. Thomas pressed 2 fingers to her throat and felt the fluttering pulse, rapid and weak. Her skin burned with fever, and when he pulled back the leather at her shoulder to examine the wound more closely, he saw that something had clawed her, 4 parallel gashes that had been left to rot. She would die here if he left her, would become just another story the settlers told about the dangers lurking beyond their walls, and perhaps that should have been enough to make him walk away. Instead, he slid his arms beneath her and lifted, grunting with the effort because she was solid muscle despite her emaciation. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her toward the cabin, and he tried not to think about what he was doing, tried not to calculate the cost of this single moment of compassion. Alina would have helped her, he thought, and that settled something in his chest even as it opened a fresh wound of grief. The cabin's interior was sparse and clean, though Thomas kept only the front rooms livable now, unable to enter the bedroom he had shared with his wife. He laid the orc woman on the narrow cot by the fireplace, then spent the next hour heating water and gathering the supplies Alina had once used to tend their occasional injuries. His hands shook as he cleaned the wound, digging out debris and draining infection while the orc woman remained unconscious, her body occasionally jerking with fever dreams. When he packed the cleaned wound with poultice and wrapped it with boiled cloth, he allowed himself to wonder who she was and what had driven her to his doorstep. Orcs lived in the deep wilderness, in clan holds that humans spoke of only in whispers, places where captives were supposedly taken and never returned. The treaty that ended the border wars 15 years ago had created an uneasy peace, but it was a peace built on separation, on the understanding that the 2 peoples would occupy their own territories and never mix. She woke 3 days later, and Thomas was sitting by the fire whittling a new handle for his pitchfork when her eyes opened. They were amber, bright and alert despite her weakened state, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him set down his knife and raise his empty hands. "You are in my home," he said slowly, keeping his voice level. "You were injured. I have treated your wound." The orc woman's gaze traveled around the cabin, taking in the single room, the sparse furniture, the door. When she tried to sit up, her face contorted with pain and she fell back with a sound that was half gasp, half growl. "Do not move," Thomas said, rising but staying where he was. "The infection was severe. You need rest." "Why?" Her voice was hoarse, accented but perfectly understandable. Why would a human help me? It was a fair question, one he had asked himself repeatedly over the past 3 days as he spooned broth between her lips and changed her bandages. "Because you were dying," he said finally. "Would you have preferred I let you?" Something flickered across her face, an expression too complex to read. "My clan would say yes. They would say death is preferable to owing debt to a human." "You owe me nothing," Thomas said, and he meant it. "When you are well enough to travel, you may leave." She studied him for a long moment, those amber eyes seeming to catalogue every detail of his face, his posture, his hands. "What is your name, human?" "Thomas Carmichael. And yours?" "Grusha." She said it like a challenge, like she expected him to laugh or recoil. When he did neither, merely nodded and returned to his chair, she frowned. "You are not afraid of me. Should I be, I could kill you." There was no threat in her tone, merely statement of fact. "You can barely lift your head," Thomas pointed out. "And even if you could, so could I kill you. So could the wolves that prowl these woods, or the cold when winter comes. We are surrounded by things that could kill us, Grusha. It seems a waste of energy to fear them all." She made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly cut off by a wince of pain. "You are strange, Thomas Carmichael." "So I have been told." He picked up his whittling again, giving her space to process, to decide what she wanted to do with this bizarre situation. "There is water beside you. You should drink." Over the following weeks, Grusha healed slowly, her orcish constitution battling the infection that had nearly claimed her life. Thomas maintained his routine, working his fields during the day and preparing simple meals in the evening, always making enough for two, though she ate little at first. They spoke sparingly, exchanges limited to practical matters, and he did not press her for the story of how she came to be wounded and alone. It was nearly a month before she told him, and only because he found her standing by the window one evening, staring out at the darkening forest with such naked longing that he could not help but ask, "You miss them? Your clan?" Grusha's shoulders tensed. "They are not my clan anymore." "What happened?" She turned to face him, and in the firelight her features were both fierce and vulnerable. "I saved a human child. She had wandered from one of your settlements, lost in the woods. My hunting party found her and they wanted to." She paused, jaw working. "Our laws say that humans in orc territory are either enemies or prizes. But she was 6 years old and crying for her mother. So I took her and ran, carried her back toward human lands with my clan warriors pursuing me." Thomas set down the pot he had been stirring, giving her his full attention. "The child, did she? I left her at the edge of a human village, watched until someone found her." Grusha touched her shoulder, where the scar from her wound was still fresh and angry. "My brother was the one who caught me. He is the one who did this. He said I was clanless, that I had betrayed our blood for human weakness. He said if he ever saw me again, he would finish what he started." The pain in her voice was raw, and Thomas recognized it because he carried the same wound, the same emptiness where belonging used to be. "I am sorry," he said, and the words felt inadequate, "to lose your family that way. They were wrong." She said it fiercely, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. She was a child. Only monsters would hurt a child. "You did the right thing," Thomas said quietly. "Even if it cost you everything." Grusha looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. "You understand?" "Yes." He did not elaborate, could not bear to speak Aliner's name aloud, but Grusha seemed to hear what he left unsaid. "You have lost someone." "My wife. 2 years ago." The words came out flat, emotionless, because that was the only way he could say them. Fever. I sat with her for 3 days while she burned, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing any of us could do. I am sorry, Thomas Carmichael. And she sounded it, genuine sympathy softening her features. They stood there in the quiet cabin, two people who had been hollowed out by loss, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both adrift, both seeking something they could not name. As autumn deepened into winter, Grusha remained. Thomas told himself it was because the mountain passes would soon be snowed in, that she could not safely travel until spring, but the truth was neither of them suggested she leave. She made herself useful, hauling water from the creek with ease, splitting wood with an efficiency that made his efforts look clumsy, helping him prepare the cabin and root cellar for the cold months ahead. She was stronger than any human woman Thomas had known, capable of lifting loads that would have required 2 men. But it was not just her physical strength that impressed him. Grusha possessed knowledge of the wilderness that he had never learned, teaching him which winter plants were edible and which were poison, how to read weather in the behavior of animals, how to set snares that even clever foxes could not escape. "Your people are foolish," she said one afternoon as they worked together to seal gaps in the cabin walls with mud and moss. "You build your homes and think you have conquered the land, but you do not understand it. You fight against nature instead of learning to move with it." "And orcs are so much wiser," Thomas asked, amused rather than offended. "We survive." She pressed moss into a crack with her strong fingers. "We do not waste resources. We do not take more than the land can give. Your settlements spread like infection, cutting down everything, driving away the game. In another generation, you will have nothing left." He considered her words as he worked. "That is why there are wars, not enough land for everyone. There would be enough if humans learned restraint." But her tone was not accusatory, merely resigned. "Though orcs are not blameless either. My clan saw all humans as enemies, could not imagine that any of you might be worth knowing. They would rather kill or conquer than consider peace. And now," Grusha glanced at him, her expression unreadable, "now I know at least one human worth knowing." The compliment, simple as it was, struck something deep in Thomas's chest. He opened his mouth to respond but found he had no words, so he simply nodded and returned to his work, ignoring the way his heart had begun to beat faster. Winter came hard that year, snow piling high enough to half bury the cabin's windows. Thomas had prepared well, his root cellar stocked with vegetables and his smokehouse filled with preserved meat, but the isolation was complete. For weeks at a time they saw no one but each other, existing in a small bubble of warmth and firelight while the world outside froze solid. They fell into rhythms without discussing them. Thomas cooked because he was better at it, while Grusha maintained the fire and kept snow cleared from the door and windows. In the evenings they would sit together, Thomas mending tools or reading aloud from the few books Alina had owned, Grusha working leather scraps into useful items with a bone, needle, and sinew thread. It was during one of these evenings, with wind howling outside and the fire crackling cheerfully, that Thomas realized he was happy. Not the deep, complete happiness he had known with Alina, but something quieter, something that felt like healing. He looked up from the book in his hands to find Grusha watching him, and their eyes met and held. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "I was thinking that I have not felt at home since I was cast out, but this place with you, it feels close to what home should be." Thomas's throat tightened. "You can stay. As long as you want. I know I said you could leave when you were healed, but if you wanted to stay, I would welcome it." "Even though it would make you an outcast among your own kind?" Grusha asked. If they learn you harbor an orc, Thomas, they will exile you at best. At worst, they will hang you as a traitor. Let them. The vehemence in his own voice surprised him. I have been alone in this cabin for 2 years, Grusha, alone with my grief and my memories and nothing else. The other settlers, they tried to help at first, but they did not understand. They wanted me to move on, to find another wife, to act as though a leaner had never existed. They made my pain an inconvenience to be solved rather than a wound to be tended. If I am outcast from people like that, I am not sure I would consider it a loss. Grusha stood and crossed to where he sat, moving with the unconscious grace that characterized all her movements. She knelt before him, bringing their eyes level, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. I do not want you to sacrifice your place among your people for me. Then what do you want? Thomas asked, and the question hung heavy with meaning neither of them was quite brave enough to name. I want. Grusha reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his face with surprising gentleness. Her palm was rough with calluses but warm. I want to stop being alone. I want to have a home again. I want to matter to someone. Thomas covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek. You matter to me. They stayed like that for a long moment, something significant shifting and settling between them. Then Grusha withdrew her hand and returned to her seat, and they did not speak of it again that night. But something had been acknowledged, a door opened that neither of them could close. The remainder of winter passed in a strange sort of suspension, both of them aware of the growing tension between them, but neither willing to push it into reality. They found excuses to touch, hands brushing as they worked together, Grusha steadying Thomas when he slipped on ice, Thomas helping her reach high shelves despite her not needing the assistance. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives before loss had redefined them. Thomas learned that Grusha had been a hunter of great skill, that she had wanted to become a ranger who patrolled the clan borders. She spoke of her mother with obvious love, describing how the older orc woman had taught her to read tracks and weather signs. Her father had died when she was young, killed in a skirmish with a rival clan, and her brother had become her protector until the day he became her enemy. In turn, Thomas told her about Alina, about how they had met at a harvest festival and married within 6 months, despite everyone saying they were too young. He spoke of building this cabin together, of Alina's laugh and her terrible singing voice, and the way she would wake before dawn to watch the sunrise. He cried as he talked, something he had not done since the funeral, and Grusha simply listened and held his hand and did not try to minimize his pain. Spring came late but sudden, the snow melting in great rushing torrents that turned the creek into a river and the fields into marshland. As the land thawed and greened, both Thomas and Grusha seemed to wake from hibernation, emerging into the world with renewed energy and purpose. They planted the fields together, Grusha's strength making quick work of the heavy labor, and they repaired the damage winter had inflicted on the cabin and outbuildings. It was during this renewal that the first settlers arrived. Thomas was working in the field when he saw them cresting the hill, 4 men on horseback. He recognized them immediately: Marcus Reed and his brothers, farmers from the nearest settlement who had been among those urging Thomas to rejoin society. His stomach dropped as he realized Grusha was visible, hanging laundry near the cabin, her green skin unmistakable even at a distance. Grusha, he called, trying to keep the panic from his voice. Go inside, now. She looked up, saw the riders, and understood immediately. But instead of fleeing, she walked to stand beside him, her jaw set with determination. No, I will not hide. They will kill you, Thomas hissed. These are not understanding men, Grusha. Please, just... I will not hide, she repeated, If you want me gone, say so, but I will not cower." There was no time to argue. The riders were close now, close enough that Thomas could see the shock and anger spreading across their faces as they registered what they were seeing. Marcus Reid reined his horse to a halt 10 feet away, his hand moving to the rifle mounted on his saddle. "Thomas Carmichael," Marcus said slowly, his eyes never leaving Grusha. "What in God's name is that thing doing on your property?" "Her name is Grusha," Thomas said, stepping slightly in front of her despite knowing it was futile. "And she is my guest. Your guest." Marcus's brother James laughed, a harsh sound. "You are harboring an orc, Thomas. Do you understand what that means? Do you know what we do to orc lovers in this territory?" "I know exactly what you do," Thomas said, his voice steadier than he felt. "And I am telling you that Grusha has done nothing wrong. She has been here through the winter, living peacefully, harming no one." "She is an orc," Marcus spat. "They do not live peacefully. They raid and kill and steal our people." "Or have you forgotten what happened to the Morrison family 5 years back?" "I have forgotten nothing," Thomas said. "But Grusha is not responsible for the crimes of other orcs any more than you are responsible for every wrong ever committed by a human. She saved a human child at the cost of her own clan, and she nearly died for that kindness. If that makes her a monster, then we are all monsters." The 4 men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Marcus still had his hand on his rifle, but he had not drawn it. "You are not thinking clearly, Thomas. Everyone knows you have not been right since Alina passed. This orc has probably bewitched you somehow, gotten into your head. I am thinking more clearly than I have in 2 years, Thomas interrupted. "And the only thing Grusha has done is remind me that there is more to life than grief. Now you can shoot me if you feel you must, but you will have to do it in front of her, and you will have to live with that for the rest of your days." It was a gamble, banking on the fact that these men were fundamentally decent despite their prejudice, that they would balk at cold-blooded murder. The silence stretched out, taut as a bowstring, and Thomas could feel Grusha tense behind him, preparing to fight or flee. Finally, Marcus removed his hand from the rifle. "You are a damned fool, Thomas Carmichael. When this ends badly, and it will end badly, do not come crying to the settlement for help. As of this moment, you are cast out. You will not be welcome in our market, at our gatherings, or on our land. You are alone with that creature, and you can die with her too for all we care." "So be it," Thomas said quietly. The 4 men turned their horses and rode away without another word, and Thomas watched them go with a strange sense of relief. He had known this moment would come eventually, had dreaded it throughout the winter, but now that it had passed he felt only a curious lightness. "You should not have done that," Grusha said behind him. Her voice shook slightly. "You have given up everything for me." Thomas turned to face her. "I have given up people who would judge me for showing basic compassion to another living being. That is not everything, Grusha. That is barely anything at all." She looked at him with such intensity that he felt exposed, every hidden feeling laid bare. "Why? Why would you sacrifice so much for me?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty, and Thomas found he could not hide behind platitudes or deflection anymore. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just a guest in my home. Because I wake up looking forward to the day, knowing I will spend it with you. Because when I imagine the future now, you are in it, and when I try to imagine it without you, everything goes gray and empty again." Grusha stepped closer, closing the distance until they were nearly touching. "Thomas, I am not saying you have to feel the same," he continued, words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know there are a dozen reasons why this makes no sense, why we are too different, why it could never work. But I am tired of being sensible and cautious and alone. Alina would have told me to seize happiness wherever I found it, and I have found it with you, Grusha. So yes, I gave up the settlement for you. I would do it again without hesitation." For a moment Grusha simply stared at him, her amber eyes wide and unguarded. Then she reached up and pulled him down into a kiss that was clumsy and uncertain and absolutely perfect. Thomas wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid strength of her body against his, and something that had been broken inside him for 2 long years finally, tentatively, began to knit together. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Grusha rested her forehead against his. "I thought I had lost the ability to care for anyone after my clan rejected me," she said softly. "I thought I would wander alone until something killed me, and I did not much care what that something was. But then I woke in your home, and you had saved me for no reason except kindness. And you kept saving me every day just by treating me like I mattered, like I was worth knowing." "You are worth knowing," Thomas said fiercely. "You are worth everything." She kissed him again, deeper this time, and when they finally pulled apart, the sun had shifted significantly in the sky and neither of them cared. They stood there in the field, holding each other, two outcasts who had found in each other exactly what they needed most. The weeks that followed were both exhilarating and challenging as they navigated this new aspect of their relationship. They were tender with each other, cautious in the way of people who have been hurt and are learning to trust again. Thomas found himself constantly aware of Grusha's presence, the way she moved through their home, the sound of her voice, the warmth of her hand in his. They worked the farm together, planting and tending crops, and Thomas marveled at how Grusha's knowledge complemented his own. She taught him techniques her people used to encourage growth without depleting the soil, while he shared the agricultural wisdom passed down through his family. The fields flourished under their combined attention, yielding more abundantly than Thomas had seen in years. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grusha said, "What happens when others come? Not just to threaten, but to drive us out." Thomas had been thinking about this too. "We could move deeper into the wilderness. Find land that no one claims, build a new homestead where neither human nor orc could object to our presence." "Running," Grusha said, not quite a question. "Surviving," Thomas corrected. "There is no shame in choosing our battles wisely. I do not want to fight the world, Grusha. I just want to live in peace with you." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I want that too, but I also do not want to spend my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to tear away what we have built. Then we will need to be careful, watchful." He laced his fingers through hers. "But we will face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." They were tested sooner than expected. Late summer brought a drought that withered crops across the territory, and as food grew scarce, tensions rose. Thomas began to hear reports from traveling traders of increased orc raids, of clans growing desperate as their hunting grounds dried up and game grew scarce. The settlers responded with patrols and armed guards, and the fragile peace that had held for 15 years began to fracture. It was during this time of tension that Thomas's past came back to find him. He was checking his traps in the forest when he heard voices, low and urgent, speaking in the harsh syllables of orcish language. Thomas froze, trying to decide whether to flee or hide, when recognition struck him cold. He knew one of those voices. It was Grusha. Moving as quietly as he could, Thomas crept closer until he could see them through the undergrowth. Grusha and 3 orc warriors, 2 men and a woman, all armed and clearly aggressive in their postures. One of the males was massive, easily half a head taller than Grusha, with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "You shame yourself, sister," the scarred orc was saying in rough common speech, likely for Thomas's benefit should he be listening. living with a human like some kind of pet. Have you no pride? I have more pride than you, Ractor, Grusha replied, her voice cold. I made a choice based on what I believed was right, and I do not regret it. You are the one who attacked your own blood for showing mercy to a child. That child was the enemy, Ractor, her brother, Thomas realized with dawning horror, snarled. You broke clan law. You broke our sacred oaths. Your sacred oaths would have had me murder an innocent, Grusha shot back. If that is what the clan stands for, then I am glad to be cast out. The female warrior stepped forward, her expression pained. Grusha, please. The drought has made things desperate. The clan is considering making alliance with other holds, planning a major raid on the human settlements. If you return now, if you show loyalty, the elders might forgive. I will not participate in slaughter, Grusha interrupted. And I will not return to a clan that values violence over wisdom. Ractor's hand moved to his weapon. Then you leave me no choice, sister. I told you what would happen if we met again. I told you I would finish what I started. Thomas burst from the undergrowth before he could think better of it, placing himself between Grusha and her brother. You will have to go through me first. The three orc warriors reacted instantly, weapons drawn, but Ractor's eyes narrowed as he studied Thomas. So this is the human who has corrupted my sister. You are smaller than I expected. Size is not everything, Thomas said, acutely aware that he was unarmed except for the small knife at his belt. Grusha is under my protection. If you want to harm her, you will have to kill me first. Thomas, no, Grusha said urgently, trying to push him aside. He will actually do it. Please, just run. I am not leaving you, Thomas said firmly. He looked at Ractor, trying to project a confidence he did not feel. Your sister saved a child from death. She chose compassion over cruelty, mercy over blind obedience. Those are not shameful things. Those are the marks of someone with true strength, the kind that comes from thinking for yourself rather than just following orders. Ractor laughed, but it was a bitter sound. You think pretty words will save you, human. You think I care about your soft notions of mercy and compassion. I think you care about your sister, Thomas said. Or you would not have come here to give her a chance to return. You would have just killed her from ambush and been done with it. The orc warrior's expression flickered, something uncertain crossing his scarred face. What I feel does not matter. Clan law is clear. Then clan law is wrong, Thomas said bluntly. And deep down, I think you know it. Otherwise, why does it bother you so much that Grusha chose differently? Why come all this way to confront her instead of just forgetting she exists? Because she is my sister, Ractor roared, and there was genuine anguish in his voice now. Because we grew up together, trained together, fought together. Because she was supposed to stand beside me when I became war chief, and instead she threw it all away for some human whelp and her own twisted sense of morality. The silence that followed was heavy with pain on both sides. Grusha moved to stand beside Thomas, taking his hand in hers. I miss you too, brother, she said quietly. I miss the clan and mother and the life I thought I would have, but I cannot be what you want me to be. I cannot close my eyes to suffering just because the victim is human. That child looked at me with such terror and hope, and I saw myself in her. I saw what I would want someone to do if our positions were reversed. You have always been too soft, Ractor said, but his anger seemed to have drained away, leaving only exhaustion. Even as children, you would cry when we had to cull the weak stock, would try to save every injured bird you found. And you would help me, Grusha reminded him. When no one was watching, you would help me build shelters for them and find them food. You were not always so hard, Ractor. The massive orc warrior closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. The world does not reward softness, Grusha. It only punishes it. Then let the world punish me, Grusha said, but I will not become something cruel just to survive. And I will not return to a clan that would demand that of me. Ractor opened his eyes and looked between Grusha and Thomas, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sheathed his weapon. I came here to kill you, he said slowly. That was my intention, but I find I cannot. You are still my sister, no matter what laws you have broken. So I will tell the clan that I found no trace of you, that you have moved beyond our reach. Relief flooded through Thomas so intensely he felt dizzy. Thank you. Do not thank me, human, Ractor said harshly. I am damning myself just as surely as Grusha has damned herself. If the clan ever learns I let her live, I will share her fate. Then why do it? Thomas asked. Ractor looked at his sister, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because she is right, and I am a coward for not admitting it sooner. Because that child she saved had a family who loved her, same as we loved Grusha. Because I am tired of pretending that might makes right. The female warrior who had spoken earlier stepped forward. Ractor, if you are going to lie to the elders, then I am with you. I never agreed with Grusha's exile in the first place. The other male warrior nodded slowly. Nor did I. The old ways are not always the best ways. Ractor clasped each of their shoulders in turn, then looked back at Grusha. Be happy, sister. Be safe. And know that some of us will remember you with love rather than shame. Grusha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, brother, for everything. The three orc warriors turned and melted back into the forest, leaving Thomas and Grusha alone in the clearing. For a long moment, neither of them moved or spoke, processing what had just happened. Then Grusha turned and buried her face against Thomas's chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He held her while she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances, and when she finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but her expression was lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted. I did not realize how much I needed that, she said hoarsely. To know that he does not truly hate me, that some part of who we were to each other survived. He loves you, Thomas said. That was clear. He just did not know how to love you and his clan's expectations at the same time. And now he has chosen, Grusha said, just as I did. We are both traitors to the old ways. Or pioneers of new ones, Thomas suggested. Maybe someday there will be more like us. More people willing to look past old hatreds and see each other as individuals rather than enemies. Grusha smiled, fragile but genuine. That is a beautiful dream, Thomas Carmichael. Then let us make it a reality, he said. Starting with us. As autumn approached, bringing with it the promise of another harsh winter, Thomas and Grusha worked to fortify their home and stockpile supplies. They also began to receive unexpected visitors, though not the violent kind they had feared. The first was a young human man named Timothy Cross, barely 18, who arrived on foot looking half-starved and desperate. He explained that he had been exiled from his settlement for refusing to participate in a raid against an orc camp that was rumored to include non-combatants. They called me a coward and a traitor, Timothy said bitterly, as Grusha fed him stew and bread. Said I was not a true man if I would not fight orcs regardless of whether they were warriors or just families trying to survive. You made the right choice, Thomas told him. Killing is not courage, it is just killing. They let Timothy stay in their barn, and he proved to be a hard worker and quick learner. With his help, they were able to complete their preparations for winter ahead of schedule, and even begin work on expanding the cabin to include a second room. The next arrival was even more surprising. An elderly orc woman named Grusha, who had been a healer in her clan before the drought made her skills less valuable than those of warriors. She was frail by orc standards, but possessed a vast knowledge of medicine and herbcraft. And she and Grusha fell into easy companionship, speaking long into the night in their shared language while Thomas and Timothy listened and tried to follow along. By the time snow began to fall, their small household had grown to include 6 people: Thomas and Grusha, Timothy, Greshka, a human woman named Zara Patterson who was fleeing an abusive marriage, and a young orc male named Drog who had deserted from a raiding party rather than participate in what he considered dishonorable combat. They were an unlikely family, but they were a family nonetheless, bound together by shared values rather than blood. They worked together to survive the winter, sharing labor and resources, and in the process they created something Thomas had never thought possible: a place where humans and orcs lived as equals, where old prejudices were set aside in favor of simple human and orc decency. It was during this winter, with their extended household snug and secure against the cold, that Thomas realized he wanted to make his commitment to Grusha permanent and official. The problem was that he had no idea how to propose to an orc, or whether such a thing was even possible. Human marriages were conducted by clergy in settlements, but he was exiled from human society and Grusha from hers. He confided his dilemma to Greshka one afternoon while they were working together to process medicinal herbs. The old orc woman listened carefully, then made a sound that might have been amusement. "Among my people," she said in her heavily accented common speech, "marriage is a practical matter. 2 people who wish to build a life together simply declare their intention before witnesses and exchange tokens. No clergy, no elaborate ceremony, just commitment spoken aloud." "That is it?" Thomas asked, surprised by the simplicity. "That is it," Greshka confirmed. "Though I suspect your people make it more complicated." "Significantly more complicated," Thomas admitted, "but I like your way better. It seems more honest somehow." Greshka gave him a knowing look. "Then do it the orc way. Grusha would appreciate the gesture, I think. It would honor her heritage even as you build something new together." Thomas took her advice. On the longest night of winter, when their household gathered around the fire for warmth and companionship, he stood and pulled Grusha to her feet. "I need to say something," he announced, his heart hammering against his ribs. "These past months with all of you have been the happiest I have known since I lost a leaner. You have reminded me that family is not just about blood, but about choosing to stand together even when the world says you should not." He turned to face Grusha directly, taking both her hands in his. "Grusha, you came into my life when I had given up on ever feeling whole again. You gave me purpose, companionship, and eventually love. I know we are different in many ways, but in the ways that matter we are the same. We both believe in compassion over cruelty, in choosing what is right over what is easy. And I want to spend the rest of my life building something good with you." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple leather cord from which hung a small wooden pendant he had carved over many secret nights. It depicted 2 hands clasped together, one human-sized and one slightly larger. "Among your people, I am told, marriage is a declaration of commitment before witnesses and an exchange of tokens. So I am declaring now before everyone here that I choose you, Grusha. I choose to build my life with you, to face whatever comes together, to honor you as my equal and my partner. Will you have me?" Grusha was crying openly now, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "Thomas, yes, I choose you too. I choose this life we are building, this strange, wonderful family we have found." She pulled something from beneath her shirt, a braided leather bracelet that Thomas recognized as one she had been working on for weeks. "I made this for you," she said, her voice shaking. "Each strand represents one of the qualities I love about you. Your kindness, your courage, your stubborn refusal to give up on people even when they have given up on themselves. I was waiting for the right moment to give it to you, but I think this is it." They exchanged tokens, Thomas fastening the leather cord around Grusha's neck while she tied the bracelet around his wrist, and then they sealed their commitment with a kiss while their household cheered and whistled. Grusha stepped forward, raising her hands for silence. "I may not be a clan elder anymore, but I remember the old words. By the customs of my people, I witness this union. Thomas Carmichael and Grusha, you have chosen each other freely and spoken your commitment before witnesses. You are married in the eyes of any who honor truth and love. May you build a good life together and face all challenges as one." It was simple and perfect and completely theirs, a marriage that honored both human and orc traditions while creating something new. As they settled back around the fire, Thomas felt a profound sense of rightness, as though all the pain and loss of the past years had been leading him to this moment, to this woman, to this life. Spring came again, bringing with it new challenges and new opportunities. Their household had become known throughout the region, whispered about in both human settlements and orc camps. Some spoke of them with disgust, but others came seeking the same thing Thomas and Grusha had found, a place to belong when they no longer fit in the world they had been born into. They expanded again, building additional structures and cultivating more land, creating what was essentially a small village of outcasts and misfits. Thomas became something like a leader, though he never sought the role, settling disputes and helping new arrivals integrate into their unusual community. Grusha served as hunter and scout, teaching others her wilderness skills and ensuring they had adequate game to supplement their crops. It was not always easy. There were arguments and personality conflicts, moments when old prejudices flared up despite everyone's best intentions. But they worked through each challenge together, gradually building a culture based on respect and equality rather than fear and hatred. The turning point came in their second summer together, when a delegation arrived from both the nearest human settlement and a major orc clan. Thomas recognized Marcus Reed among the humans, while Grusha identified her former clan's elders among the orcs. They came separately but seemed to have coordinated, arriving within hours of each other and requesting a meeting. Thomas and Grusha stood together to receive them, their household gathered behind them in a show of solidarity. Marcus spoke first, his expression uncomfortable but determined. "We have been watching you," he said without preamble, "watching what you have built here, and we have been discussing among ourselves what it means." "And what does it mean?" Thomas asked carefully. Marcus glanced at the orc delegation, then back. "It means that maybe there is another way. The drought still threatens us all, human and orc alike. Resources are scarce, and if we continue to fight over them, we will all starve. But if we could learn to share, to cooperate as you have done here." He trailed off, looking almost hopeful. The orc elder stepped forward, an ancient female whose face was a map of scars. "The clans have been discussing this also," she said, her voice surprisingly strong despite her age. "The young deserve better than endless war. They deserve the chance to build something lasting, something good. Your household has proven it is possible for our peoples to live in peace. We wish to learn from your example." Thomas felt Grusha's hand find his, squeezing tight. "You are saying you want to establish formal peace between your settlement and your clan." "Between all settlements and all clans," Marcus corrected. "Or at least, those willing to try. It will not be easy and many will resist, but we have to start somewhere." The orc elder nodded agreement. "We propose a treaty with your household serving as neutral ground for negotiations. You have earned trust from both our peoples by living your values rather than just speaking them." Thomas looked at Grusha, seeing his own amazement reflected in her amber eyes. This was beyond anything they had imagined, a chance to turn their small sanctuary into something that could change the entire region. "We will do it," Grusha said firmly. "Whatever we can do to help, we will do. But understand this," Thomas added. "We will not compromise on the principles that brought us together. Human and orc must be treated as equals in all negotiations. No one will be required to give up their culture or identity, only their hatred. If you can agree to that, then we will serve as mediators gladly." Both Marcus and the orc elder nodded. "That is acceptable," they said in near unison, then glanced at each other with surprised expressions that might have been the beginning of mutual respect. The negotiations took months, involving representatives from dozens of settlements and clan holds. There were setbacks and heated arguments, moments when it seemed the entire effort would collapse into renewed violence. But Thomas and Grusha held firm, supported by their household and a growing number of allies from both peoples who wanted to see peace succeed. They hammered out agreements on territory, resource sharing, dispute resolution, and intermarriage. They established rules for trade and travel, creating pathways for humans and orcs to interact peacefully. And slowly, painfully, they built the framework for a new society where both peoples could prosper. Through it all, Thomas marveled at how his life had transformed. 3 years ago he had been a broken widower, alone with his grief and seeing no path forward. Now he was helping to reshape the future, not through violence or coercion, but through the simple act of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation. One evening, as he and Grusha walked the boundaries of what had become a proper village, she said, "Do you ever regret it, choosing this path? You could have remarried another human, lived a simple, quiet life without all this responsibility." Thomas pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Not even for a moment. You gave me back my life, Grusha. You reminded me why living matters. Every challenge we face is worth it because I face it with you." "You are going to make me cry again," Grusha said, but she was smiling. "You have a terrible habit of saying exactly the right thing at the right time." "I learned from the best," Thomas replied. "You taught me how to be brave, how to stand for what I believe even when it costs everything. I am just following your example." They stood together watching the sun set over their village, over the fields they had planted and the buildings they had raised, over the community they had built from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. In the distance, they could see humans and orcs working side by side, children of both species playing together without the burden of their parents' old hatreds. "We did it," Grusha said softly. "We actually did it." "We did," Thomas agreed, "and we are just getting started." The treaty was signed the following spring, in a ceremony attended by representatives from 20 human settlements and 15 orc clans. Thomas and Grusha stood at the center of it all, their hands clasped together, as leaders from both peoples made their marks on the document that would govern peace between them. It was not perfect. There were still those who refused to participate, who clung to old animosities and could not imagine another way. But for the first time in generations, peace was the rule rather than the exception, and the region began to heal from decades of conflict. As for Thomas and Grusha, they continued to lead their village, which had officially been recognized as neutral territory under the treaty. People came from across the region to see the place where humans and orcs lived as one community, and many stayed, adding their own skills and perspectives to the growing settlement. 2 years after the treaty signing, Grusha gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful child with her mother's green skin and her father's gray eyes. They named her Alina, after Thomas's first wife, because Grusha insisted that honoring the past was important even as they built the future. Alina brought you to the frontier, Grusha said as she cradled their newborn daughter. Without her, you would never have been here for me to find. Our daughter will carry her name as a reminder that love transcends everything, even death. That the good we do echoes forward in ways we cannot predict. Thomas held them both, his wife and daughter, and felt a completeness he had never expected to experience again. He had lost so much, but in losing it, he had been broken open enough to find something new, something equally precious. Their village continued to grow and thrive, becoming a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. Thomas and Grusha raised Alina to be proud of both her heritages, teaching her human and orc customs, giving her the tools to move freely between both worlds. She would be the first of a new generation, children who would never know the old hatreds because they embodied the union of both peoples. As the years passed, Thomas sometimes thought about the man he had been before Grusha crashed into his life. That man had been lost, drowning in grief, unable to see any purpose in continuing. But loss had prepared him for love in a way that comfort never could. It had stripped away everything superficial, everything that did not matter, leaving only the essential core of who he was. And that core had recognized its match in Grusha, in her strength and vulnerability, in her determination to live according to her values no matter the cost. They had both lost so much, she her clan, he his wife, but in that shared emptiness they had found exactly what they needed from each other. Not a replacement for what was gone, but something new and precious, built on the foundation of their losses. They had learned that healing does not mean forgetting, that moving forward does not require leaving the past behind. It means carrying what was with you, letting it shape you but not define you, using the lessons of grief to build something beautiful. On their 10th wedding anniversary, celebrated according to both human and orc traditions, Thomas and Grusha stood before their village and renewed their vows. Alina, now 8 years old and fierce as her mother, stood with them, along with the 3 younger children they had welcomed in the intervening years. Behind them stood dozens of families, human and orc and mixed, all of whom had found sanctuary in the community Thomas and Grusha had created. 10 years ago, Thomas said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, I was a broken man who thought his life was over. Grusha was a cast-out warrior who thought she had no place in the world. We found each other in our darkest moments, and we chose to build something together despite every reason to give up. Today we stand before you not just as husband and wife, but as living proof that love is stronger than hate, that hope is more powerful than despair, that what we build together is always greater than what we can accomplish alone. Grusha squeezed his hand and addressed the crowd in turn. We are not perfect. We have made mistakes and will make more. But we have never stopped trying to create a world where everyone has a place to belong, where no one has to choose between their values and their community. That is the legacy we want to leave our children, the gift we want to give to all of you. Not a perfect world, but one where imperfect people keep trying to do better, keep choosing love over fear. The crowd erupted in cheers, humans and orcs celebrating together, and Thomas pulled Grusha close for a kiss while their children laughed, and the village they had built together looked on with joy. It had been a long journey from that moment when he first found her collapsed at the edge of his field, broken and dying. But every step had been worth it. Every challenge had taught them something vital, and every choice to stay together despite the obstacles had strengthened their bond. That night, after the festivities had ended and their children were asleep, Thomas and Grusha sat together on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The village was quiet around them, smoke rising from chimneys, the occasional laugh or snatch of song drifting on the breeze. "You think Alina would have approved?" Thomas asked softly. It was a question he had never quite dared to voice before. "Of us, of everything we have built?" Grusha considered carefully before answering. "I never knew her, so I cannot say for certain. But from everything you have told me about her, she sounds like someone who valued kindness and compassion above all else. Someone who would judge you by the content of your character rather than arbitrary rules. So yes, I think she would have approved. I think she would have been proud of the man you have become, of the good you have done in her memory." Thomas felt his eyes burn with tears, but they were clean tears, cathartic rather than painful. "Thank you, for understanding, for never asking me to forget her. She was part of making you who you are," Grusha said simply. "Just as my clan, for all their faults, made me who I am. We do not honor those who shaped us by pretending they never existed. We honor them by living well, by being the best versions of ourselves that we can be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, breathing in sync. Finally, Thomas said, "I love you, Grusha. More than I ever found words for. You saved my life in every way that matters." "And you saved mine," Grusha replied, turning to meet his eyes. "We saved each other. That is what love is, I think. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to face the world together, to be stronger together than either could be alone." "Then we are doing it right," Thomas said with a smile. "We are doing it right," Grusha agreed. They sat together until the stars filled the sky. Two people who had lost everything and found each other, who had built a new world from the ashes of their old ones. Around them, their village slept peacefully, a testament to what was possible when people chose connection over isolation, love over fear, hope over despair. Thomas Carmichael had lost his wife to fever, and Grusha had lost her clan to principle. But in losing, they had gained something neither had known they needed. They had needed someone who understood loss, who would not flinch from pain but meet it head-on. They had needed someone brave enough to defy the world, strong enough to stand alone if necessary. They had needed each other exactly as they were, in exactly the moment they met. And in needing and finding and choosing each other, they had not just healed themselves but planted seeds of healing that would spread far beyond their own lives. Their children would grow up in a world where human and orc were not automatic enemies, where love between different peoples was accepted rather than forbidden. Others would follow their example, building bridges across divides that had seemed unbridgeable. Years later, when historians wrote about the great peace that transformed the region, they would point to many factors: the drought that made cooperation necessary, the emergence of enlightened leaders, the exhaustion of decades of warfare. But those who actually lived through it, who saw it unfold from the ground up, knew the truth. It began with one widowed farmer who chose compassion over convenience, one exiled warrior who valued life over obedience, and the love that grew between them against all odds. Their story became legend, told and retold around fires in both human settlements and orc camps. Some details were exaggerated, others simplified, but the heart of it remained true. That two broken people had found each other and built something beautiful, that loss had prepared them for love, that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. Thomas and Grusha grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren who embodied the unity they had fought so hard to establish. They watched their village grow into a town, then nearly a city, a hub of trade and culture where human and orc innovations blended into something new and vibrant. They saw the treaty they had helped negotiate become the foundation for lasting peace, watched as the old animosities slowly, inexorably faded into history. And through it all, They remained constants for each other, the anchor points that made everything else possible. On quiet evenings they would sit together as they had always done, hands linked, sharing stories and silence in equal measure. They never forgot where they had come from, the pain that had shaped them, the losses that had hollowed them out and somehow made room for love to grow. When Thomas was 73 and Grusha 71, they took a walk together to the place where they had first met, to the field where he had found her dying and made the choice that changed both their lives. It was spring, and the land was green and growing, bursting with life and possibility. "Do you remember what you thought when you first saw me?" Grusha asked, her green skin now weathered with age but her amber eyes still bright and alert. "I thought you were going to die," Thomas admitted. "And I thought I could not let that happen, even though it would have been safer for me if you had. What about you? Do you remember waking up?" Grusha smiled. "I remember thinking you were foolish for saving an orc. And then I remember thinking that perhaps foolishness was just another name for courage, that maybe the world needed more fools like you. And now I think we were both fools," Grusha said, leaning against him. "Wonderful, brave, stubborn fools who refused to let the world tell them what was possible, and I would not change a single moment of our foolishness." Thomas kissed her weathered forehead. "Nor would I. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Grusha, the best choice I ever made." "We were the best thing that happened to each other," she corrected. "That is the truth of it. Not that one saved the other, but that we saved each other. That we kept saving each other every single day just by choosing to stay, to love, to build something together." They stood there until the sun set, two old lovers at the place where their story began, and they knew without discussing it that this was a full circle moment, a closing of one chapter even as others continued. They had lived full lives, rich lives, meaningful lives. They had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. They had changed the world not through grand gestures but through small, daily choices to be kind, to be brave, to honor each other and the values they shared. Whatever time they had left, they would spend it as they had spent the last decades, together, partners in all things, two halves of a whole that should never have existed but did anyway, stubbornly, beautifully, triumphantly. They were living proof that loss does not have to mean the end, that grief can be transformed into something generative, that the most broken among us can still find wholeness if we are brave enough to reach for it. Hand in hand, Thomas and Grusha walked back to their home as the first stars appeared overhead. Two people who had needed exactly the same thing from each other and found it, against all odds, against all expectations, against a world that said their love was impossible. They had proven that world wrong, and in doing so they had opened doors for countless others to follow. Their legacy was not just the peace they helped establish or the community they built, but the fundamental truth they embodied: that love is always possible, that healing is always within reach, that we are never so broken that we cannot be made whole again. All it takes is courage, compassion, and the willingness to see another person's pain as worthy of relief, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Thomas Carmichael lost his wife, and Grusha lost her clan. But in that shared loss they found each other, found purpose, found a love that transcended species and prejudice, and every reasonable objection. They built a life together that honored both their pasts and their present, that made space for grief and joy in equal measure. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. That was the happy ending they had earned through every trial, every choice, every moment they chose each other over the easier path. Their story did not end with their deaths, but continued in the lives they had touched, the world they had changed, the love they had proven was possible. They lived on in their descendants, in the mixed communities that flourished across the region, in the very idea that human and orc could be not just allies but family. They had needed someone who understood loss and chose love anyway, and they had found that someone in each other. That was their gift to the world, proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the most impossible love can flourish, that choosing compassion over convenience can literally change everything.